afternoon, greetings and salutations to all the worthy participants. I'm extremely glad to welcome you all on the final and concluding day of the one-week international workshop on language translation skills. To begin with, let me apprise the participants with some vital information pertaining to the final assessment. The assessment shall be conducted during valedictory session after Dr. Vandana Sharma finishes her special talk. The link for the assessment shall be shared in the description box and message box of the YouTube channel. It's an objective type assessment. Kindly answer the questions and submit the Google form. Based on your test and feedback forms, the certificate shall be mailed to you as soon as possible. Now let's welcome the expert for today, Dr. Tariq Khan, Officer in Charge, National Translation Mission. He works as lecturer cum junior research officer at the Central Institute of Indian Languages, MHRD, Government of India. Dr. Khan has received training in applied linguistics at the University of Hyderabad. Prior to working in CIIL, Dr. Khan has worked as a guest faculty at the Center for Applied Linguistics and Translation Studies. His areas of interest include psycholinguistics, humor studies, sociolinguistics, translation studies, and intercultural pragmatics. You're welcome, Dr. Khan, to continue with the technical session. Kindly proceed.
Good afternoon, one and all. This is perhaps the last academic session, and it is my pleasure to have some words with the participants. And I would like to begin with the short description of the title of my talk, which is Translator as a Language Scientist. And at first, I would wish to discuss something about the topic, and then I would present some problems, some examples, and discuss a few things which are in relation to the translation theories. And after that, I would present some solutions for the problems I have raised. And then finally, I'll talk about the job prospects in translation industry as expected by the organizers. And before I begin, let me also share with you the slides. I think it is disabled. It is not taking it. Mohit, can you look into it? Mohit, can you look into it?
Accept, it's enabled. It's enabled. You click on, you go to the bottom of the screen, you click share screen, green color button, and then share the. Go at the bottom of the screen. There is share screen where you the audio.
Bottom of the screen, I'm sure. Yeah. No, it has just expanded, and then yeah. So is it visible? Yeah. Now I think it has started sharing. All
yes,
right.
it is.
Yeah.
Yes,
now I think it should be okay now.
It's visible, sir. Please proceed.
All right. I'm sorry for the glitch, and I hope I can proceed with relative ease now.
That's okay, sir. Please continue.
First, I take the option of discussing the motivations for calling something scientific. What I have observed is in the academic discourses, something that has the word scientific in its name has higher value than that which is not scientific, as if it is unscientific and not scientific at all. If we carefully look into the names of the disciplines, various subjects like political science or social science, they all have the word science in them to just indicate the point that these are all disciplines which follow an organized and systematic pattern. I would like to test the mic again. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir, you are audible. Please go ahead.
All right, yeah, thank you. So the point that I'm trying to make is why translators can be called language scientists, and why should we discuss the word science or scientist in the first place. Please notice that it is in the social attitude that the high performing students in schools are encouraged to take up science disciplines, and those who are not so well doing are encouraged to take up social sciences or humanities. It is very common to observe in all schools in our country, and even in our surroundings we notice that children who are doing well in their academics are encouraged to take up sciences, as if the courses in sciences are meant for higher order thinking, and courses in social sciences or humanities are meant for not so intricate theoretical disciplines. So here, when I say translators as language scientists, I have in a way tried to project the idea that translation also involves some scientific techniques, and then we also need to examine whether there is a necessity to call it a science or not also. So let us just have a look at what translators do. If you examine carefully, a translator is a person who is good in at least two languages, or at least in two varieties of a language. And not only that he is or she is good at two languages, he or she is also able to oscillate freely between the two languages. So when the person is able to oscillate between the two languages, which have their own worldviews, which are distinct, unique in their own, then we need to appreciate the fact that translators are slightly distinct. They are slightly different from other human beings who are monolinguals or who are not so good at things. Language sciences is an area, linguistics or language sciences, which studies languages in an organized and systematic manner. And when we notice the work of translators, we notice that translators are also doing a similar activity at a different level. So linguists are more interested in forms and functions of the language, whereas translators look at slightly larger, take slightly bigger examples. Say if linguists focus on words and sentences and do not go beyond, say, paragraphs, translators begin with paragraphs. So there is a definite relationship between them, and we should recognize that. But then what is happening in translation studies? Translation studies refers to a discipline which studies the phenomena of translation and theorizes the act of translation. So if we look at translation studies, we notice that the actions of a translator, which has necessarily to do with semantics and pragmatics, that is the study of meaning and language in use. But these are some areas which are not taken up or not given weightage within translation studies. Similarly, translators and translations are not given proper weightage in academic spheres. So if you have to, say, read a book which is translated in the language that you know, you would say, I'm reading a translation, and you always would like to read the original, and the overemphasis on original has actually brought or has rendered translation a kind of a value which is less than what it deserves. Then we also look at what translators do and what translation theorists do. It is very interesting and at the same time sad to see that actual translators do not require translation theories. So those who are translating on a day-to-day basis do not require translation theories, whereas the actual theorists, or say those who are theorizing translations, are not translating at all. So that is why we need to take into consideration a kind of a balance, the requirement for a balance between translation practitioners, or say translators and translatresses, and translation theorists. Let me introduce you the terms which are very common in this field of investigation. When we say the word translation, and these are a few things which are discussed by most of earlier speakers. I would just like to repeat them to make my point clearer in coming slides. So when we look at the word translation, it has to do with source text and target text, which is very easy to understand. Source text would refer to from language, and target text would refer to language. And a similar activity called interpretation, which exists at the oral level. So there's a distinction between translation and interpretation, which exists at the level of mode. The difference between translation and interpretation would be due to modality. So translation is related to written and printed materials. Interpretation is related to oral and oral materials. If I speak something, say I speak on how to construct a design, and somebody else renders the same orally in a different language, it would be called interpretation. Whereas if I write something, say an essay on Zoom application, and then somebody else renders it in a language in the written form, it would be called translation. So the difference between translation and interpretation is primarily at the level of modality. Translation is at the written and printed level, whereas interpretation exists at the oral and oral level. In interpretation, it is important to notice that there are two possibilities. One is called the simultaneous interpretation, where a person speaks, and at the same time, in the same time, some other person is speaking the entire text in a different language. And the other one is called sequential translation, where interpretation, where a person speaks something, takes a pause, the other person repeats that. Then other adjacent and cooperating areas in translation field are adaptation and adaptation studies, dubbing, subtitling. These are some of the things which are very promising, and they are offering a lot of opportunities for those who want to pursue translation as a career. I would like to emphasize on another concept called transliteration, which exists mostly at the level of script, and rendering of something from a written script to another written script would be called transliteration. So in the example given here, if you look at the word transliteration, it's Roman, it's written in the Roman script, and the same thing is transliterated into the Devanagari. And you see the example in the red font. Transliteration and transcription are written. These are instances of transliteration, basically. Then we come to another concept called transcription, which is a systematic symbolization of sounds, and it exists mostly at this level of sound, but it is the sounds are given symbols, and that is more systematic in nature. So in case of transliteration, there is a possibility that people can adopt different schemes. So the letter ta of Devanagari, pronounced as ta, is written with the letter T in North India, and with the letters TH in South India. Now it is both are instances of transliteration. So a name like Tomar will be written as Tomar, and it can also be written as Thomar, depending upon which writing system one is following. But then transliteration is not as systematic as transcription. But you notice the problem. Transcription is in a script which is not commonly known. It is devised for specialized people. It is something which requires you another set of literacy. So all of a sudden, if something appears before you in a script which is universal, and you do not have a training, it will look like the person has developed some xenoglossic ideas and has just written something which you cannot follow without proper training. Let me bring before you some other issues which are very important in the area of translation and translation studies. First is the idea of equivalence, and if this is a slightly controversial topic, but then we need to take into consideration this topic because all the time the translators are attempting to provide equivalents. We very well know that languages are unique in their own, and even within the language it is not possible to have perfect synonymy. Even within the same language it is not possible to discuss everything that is spoken in a particular speech form or a dialect or a language community into another speech form or dialect or variety. Then it is very obvious that it would not be possible in another language or variety also. So in that case, the idea of equivalence is very problematic. But then what do translators do? Have you come across a translator, an efficient translator, who says, no, something is untranslatable, or I do not have an equivalent? Usually what happens is the translators would provide you something. The translators would provide you something with which the act of communication would complete, the transfer of message would complete successfully. How do translators achieve that? They achieve that with this help of equivalents. How do equivalence and equivalent terms help us in other aspects? Let us see. The amount of scientific and technical information that we have, the amount of scientific and technical knowledge that we have gained would not have been possible if we were performing only in one language. But we know that any new development in any part of the world also automatically, instantly reaches other parts of the world too. And this has been possible primarily because there has been attempts to transfer that technology in another languages by localizing it and by providing equivalents. For that matter, the or say for such objectives, the translators would make use of dictionaries and specialized dictionaries called glossaries. And then there is something new that National Translation Mission has brought out called translation equivalents. So these are like domain specific dictionaries where the meaning is not literal, but rather these meanings are specific to that discipline. Consider a word like appreciation, and you notice that the word appreciation in literal sense would mean something which is strikingly different from what it means to say somebody from economics or somebody from commerce. So we notice that individual terms which have say designated meaning in literal sense adopt very different specialized meanings in various domains of studies. We also notice that when we look at the total volume of or the total quantum of words that a language has, then it is something very interesting. The total quantum of words in a language would be called lexis, and that lexis shows us some patterns, some patterns in which the language has organized its vocabulary. So each language has its own patterns in which it has organized its vocabulary, and that makes it very interesting. And we notice that in the process of translation, some of those specialized terms which are unique to a language pose bigger problems than others which are common. Let us take examples of things like brother and cousins. Okay, so if we just try to find out what words do we have for say brother, we would notice that we go on to say elder brother, younger brother, and not brother actually. And then if we compare what words are there for say younger brother in English, or say maternal brother, or say paternal brother, or a cousin who is or from the mother side or father side, we notice that we have to make use of compounds and individual words are not there. So the absence of such words indicate that there is a kind of a lexical pattern, and also there is a kind of lexical gap. So languages show lexical patterns, and they also show lexical gaps, and these gaps are important to know because they are things which are important from the point of view of cultural distinctiveness. So each language represents a particular culture, and each culture is expressed in a particular language, and then the distinct aspects of those culture are represented through that language. Now, these are some of the very basic things, common wisdoms on translation, which may not be unique for anyone to know. And when a translator is performing, perhaps even without reading these points, the translator is performing the action. Now, the translation. Let us have a look at the translation theorist. There has been a lot of discussion, even in this workshop. There has been a lot of discussion on Western theories and Eastern theories. My concern with respect to translation theories is that calling something Western or calling something Eastern isn't a very good idea, because that territorializes the idea itself. And I cannot accept the point that say translation theories did not exist in as a civilization like India. It must have existed. It is possible that the name given to the umbrella term given to the whole set of activities would be something which refers to an instance of it, or an item within that. So therefore, when a particular idea exists, ideas contrasting to that, ideas adjacent to that, ideas similar to that would also be available there. And therefore, my caution for the translation theorists and translation studies students is that is not to territorialize theories and say that this is a typical Western view or Western theory, this is a typical Western idea. This actually does not help in the long run, because we tend to form a view even without reading, even without knowing what actually would be Western, even without reading them. So therefore, it is important to discuss the ideas instead of where they are originating, and whether they are originating here or not. In the context, time and place, we are discussing things. Then we also look at some other natural concomitants of translation activity. When lexical gaps are there, when patterns are there, and when something is missing, then obviously, in order to achieve the full transfer of message, the translators would adopt either of the two possibilities, the two strategies called divergence and convergence. So these are also very natural. It is very natural that in the process of translation, there can be divergence or convergence, or addition or deletion. You can call them loss or gain in translation. There are very interesting papers with the issue of lost in translation and with the issue of gain in translation. One would be interested to know them, but then that would be outside the scope of present discussion. We also look at certain other aspects which are necessary because of the lexical gaps. If a language does not have a certain item and there is a translation happening in them, or if a language does not have something and translation is happening in a language which has that, obviously there would be requirements of metaphorization, there would be requirement of euphemization, there would be requirement of explicitation, and these are very helpful techniques. So what happens in case of metaphorization is the translator would not be able to find an exact terminology for transferring the message, but would use metaphors and still succeed in communicating the message. Occasionally, certain items which are easy to discuss in a given language are difficult to discuss in another language. In that case, the technique of euphemization helps. And at the same time, also in contrast to euphemization, some languages permit explicitation of the topic also. Let us just take examples from our everyday life. When we visit a doctor, when we have to discuss about the human body parts, we often tend to switch our language, and we use a language says like which is slightly more dominant, which are major, which are internationalized. Say if I have to visit a doctor and discuss about human body parts, I would be switching to English automatically. And probably because the languages which I know, the language which I speak, considers discussions of body terms kind of a taboo, then uh, then it is very natural for the translators to switch in those instances. Let us also take into consideration certain other aspects of lexical patterns in given languages. Idioms are very natural. All languages have idioms. Proverbs are very natural. They are cultural artifacts, and they are also very natural to any given language. Humor and instances of jokes or humor text, they are also very natural to a language. But what happens is these are slightly opaque in nature. These are texts which are difficult to follow occasionally. How and why? Idioms are instances of are instances in which words are presented together, but then combination of the meaning of individual words would not help in arriving at the meaning of the idiom used there. So if one looks at individual words meanings, probably he or she will not be able to understand the idiom fully, because it is fossilized in the cultural context. Similarly, proverbs uh, are carried through generations, and uh, proverbs proverbs when put into translation adopt a very different form altogether. Humor, of course, humor arises because of the multiple interpretations, because of the possibility of multiple interpretations in a given language. So in that case, if humor is to be translated, say a joke is to be translated, then the target language should also permit a similar kind of or say similar possibility of multiple interpretations. Let us also take into consideration some ideas from the discipline of pragmatics. How is it that we are able to converse? When we are having a say conversation, we speak things and we assume that the listeners also understand them. But then very often we enter into situations in which the speaker would say, I did not intend to say this, or I did not mean this. And there are instances of mishearing also on part of the listeners. And then there are instances of miscommunication, misunderstandings. So we usually think that the speakers and listeners, if they speak properly, probably this kind of problem would not have arisen. Let us try to understand this point in a slightly different way. Hubbard Paul Grice proposed some maxims, you can call them principles of conversation, and these are very interesting, very simple points, very simple for anyone to understand. These are simple points to explain how we converse and how we should converse successfully. What Grice mentions is, when in a successful communication, we follow certain rules, and these rules are in the first place maxim of quantity, and that says you be precise. So don't speak more than what is required, don't speak less than what is required, so speak as much as required. A very simple thing to understand. Similarly, Grice in the next maxim mentions that mentions that be truthful. So Grice says it in the maxim of quality, that speak not what you believe to be untrue. That means if you were asked a question like, or say if I were asked a question like, how do you make coffee, and I cannot begin with the coffee is grown in some parts of the country where the temperature is suitable for growing coffee. I cannot begin from that point. I'll have to begin from my position within the kitchen and putting something on the stove and begin the process of boiling. Similarly, I cannot, in the question relevant to, or say in the question asked for coffee, I cannot give description of say tea or juice. So these maxims basically talk about the quantity. It says be precise. It says be truthful. It says be relevant. Do not talk about something else from what is being asked for. And then it also says provide proper manner. That means the description cannot be in a disorderly arrangement. The arrangement of the information should be proper so that the listener would be able to follow. So at the surface, it looks like a very simple idea, and all of us would be following that. But then let us see our day-to-day communication and see whether these maxims are actually followed, or they are flouted, or we are violating them also occasionally. When you enter into a room and you ask somebody how are you, and the person says, don't you know about the COVID situation? Now look at the question and look at the answer. So your question was how are you, and the person says, don't you know about the COVID situation or the impact of COVID-19? So you notice that the question asked was very different from the answer that has come. Still the communication does not fail. Still the communication does not fail, because you extract from the answer that the situation is difficult for the person, and the person is not happy about whatever the COVID has done, and he is probably not well, or she is not probably well. So how is it that the maxims are flouted here? Is still the communication does not fail. No misunderstanding happens. What happens here is there is a kind of a cooperative principle working. There is a kind of cooperation between the speaker and the hearer. So what happens is, when we are generally conversing, we assume that the speaker would not ask us an irrelevant question. We assume that the listener would not answer something which is completely irrelevant. So there is a kind of an undeclared, there's a kind of understanding which states that the speaker and the listener would cooperate in the act of conversation, and that is how the communication works. Let us try to see if there is any maxim working in translation also. And then what could that maxim be? Are there principles for translation, and what are those principles? So we notice that the communication does not fail in some cases where there is momentary flouting of maxims. Rather, it becomes more interesting, and when the cooperation between the speaker and the listener is there, the conversation goes on. Similarly, can there be a cooperation between those assigning the translation and those performing the translations? Here what we notice is, in the process of evaluating the work of a translator, we often tend to be very critical, and we tend to be at a kind of a fault finding mission, and we tend to look at what has not been translated fully, what has gone missing, what is lost and what is gained, how much of deviation has happened. Now this is something which requires our attention. Can there not be say cooperation working at that level? Because on the whole, we need to appreciate the fact that the translator, being a person knowing both the languages, has carried forward the load from one language to another language to the extent possible. And when we look at this, it is not just to say ask for sympathy for the translators. It is not just to say that our evaluation of translators should be very lenient, because there are scientific texts, there are technological texts which require translations on a regular basis, and any slightest alteration in such texts would lead to disasters. So what happens at that level? What could possibly be done? And if we start examining them, then we need to look at certain other factors which are pertinent to culture, which are pertinent to the way our societies are arranged, the way the language, society, and culture are intertwined in the concerned languages. We also need to look at how various other scholars have tried to explain these situations. Let us have a look at Roman Jakobson's classification of translation activities. So Roman Jakobson classifies translation in three forms. One he calls intralingual, where the translation is occurring within the language. So it is a kind of a transfer of message from one variety to another variety, from one speech form to another speech form only. And the other one he calls interlingual, where the translation, proper translation, the way we understand the term takes place. And the third one is intersemiotic translation. So according to Jakobson, this form was relevant to translation of scientific and technological materials, theories in particular, but we also notice such things in our day-to-day experiences, say on road. You see the traffic signals and behave accordingly. The red light would mean the vehicle should stop, the green light would mean the vehicle should move. So how are we able to perceive them? We are able to perceive them because there is a kind of an intersemiotic translation taking place there. Look at the signs on the roadside. We are able to perform there because we are able to perform in the intersemiotic translation. Let us also have a look at say, what Peter Newmark and Laurie Chamberlain and Sherry Simon have done. Peter Newmark basically talks about two forms of translation. One he calls word for word translation, which is a formal translation and which often has been treated as linguistic translation, or say language based translation, which is formal in nature. So where only a particular word and its equivalent would matter. However, he makes a distinction of this word-to-word translation with sense for sense translation, and he calls sense for sense translation a translation which is based on the expectations from the socio-cultural point of view. So he gave a lot of emphasis to sense for sense translation, and I think any translator who is working today would be following sense for sense translation. So this has become a kind of a common wisdom today. Similarly, we can take into consideration the NIDA's two-way classification, which is also very similar to what Newmark has said. NIDA discusses formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. So dynamic equivalence is an instance in which the translator would be adopting equivalences, or say message in the from the or say in the target language, and from the perspective of the target language speakers. Then we look at the paper published by Laurie Chamberlain called Gender and Metaphorics of Translation, in which Laurie Chamberlain argues that various scholars in past have sexualized the discourse of translation and have discussed translation from using words, using arguments which are probably unacceptable from gender point of view. Similarly, Sherry Simon discusses how males and females would translate differently. So the translation done by a male translator would be different from, or say how much it would differ from a translation done by a female person who is called translatress. Though the term translatress had come into existence in late 19th century, she uses it in her book, in her 1996 book, and then this word called translatress, referring to a woman translator, becomes very popular. Now, taking into consideration all these theoreticians and scholars of translation studies, let us also take into consideration one more point, that is important for us to understand. Most of the translation theories, right from the start, and the discipline of translation studies, right from the start, have borrowed from other existing theories. So the problem there is translation studies and the discussions of translation have heavily depended on ad hoc theories, and the theories were not developed for translation in particular. Only in the later part, when translation studies, and we should also examine why translation studies is called translation studies. Why translation studies is called translation studies is because its growth took place mostly in 1950s and 60s, when interdisciplinary studies started taking great strides, and translation became important at that time. So a lot of disciplines which came up around that time have the word studies in them. And since translation studies deals with various disciplines like comparative literature, gender studies, culture studies, film studies, so obviously it is or say naturally it is interdisciplinary. And then we come back to uh, why why translation has not been able to have its theories. The reason is very simple. When translators in past were translating, they were basically translating, and they were not at that time they were not theorizing translation for the pedagogical purposes in universities. Whereas in 1960s and 70s, the discussions on translation were also for the purpose of teaching this discipline in universities and colleges. And that is why a lot of ad hoc theories were taken into consideration, and later on translation theories also developed. Let us just have a look at some expressions and see if we can translate them in the languages that we know. Consider the word hello, and my gut intuition is in most Indian languages it would be difficult to translate hello, and it would be equivalent to namaskar, namaskara, namaste, salam, adab, something of that sort. So we see that hello is not uh, exactly same as hello is not exactly same as uh, namaste or namaskar. And similarly, we look at the another example. The example says all the best, and if we were to translate all the best, then it would be very difficult for us, because such expressions have some kind of cultural rooting, and they are late entries in the speech repertoire of the languages that we or the communities that we belong to, and the languages that we speak. So it becomes very difficult. At the same time, if we look at another expression called holy shit, and then we look into when an expression like holy shit is used, you'll notice that it often compares with taking the name of the god. So holy shit at times becomes comparable with oh my god. And if say a very big mistake happens at some place, the individual instead of calling holy shit would say hey bhagwan or ya Allah, or would also say a word like satyanash, things like that. And if we sit to compare between the two expressions used in the source and the target languages, it would be very difficult. It would not be possible to have exact references between them. In that case, the cultural knowledge of the source and target languages are very helpful. We also look at slightly more problematic concepts like dowry. So dowry, as generally understood, is an amount that is paid by the bride side. Now, how do we find an equivalent, and how do we translate it? If it is translated into Hindi, it would refer to Dahej, which is more or less similar to dowry, which is not a problem. But then another concept called Kanya Shulkam or Dal Meher, which are Kanya Shulkam is prevalent in Telugu, Tamil, and Kannada culture, and this is an amount which is paid from the groom's side. And Dal Meher is also says an Islamic concept. So people of Islamic faith would use the concept of dal meher, which is an amount which is paid by the groom's side, or say paid by the groom to the bride, and this amount is payable in the lifetime. So now how are we able to translate them? What strategies can we adopt? These are some instances where the translator has difficult choices. The translator has to adopt, has all the options. The translator and then has to choose from the best from the options. The translator has the options like metaphorization. The translator has the option like euphemization. The translator has the option of gain and loss. The translator has the option of transliteration. So occasionally we are noticing that in various novels, the translators are not providing equivalents, and rather they are retaining the source term and they put them in italics so that it becomes easy for the readers and audience and the viewers to know what is, to know that this does not belong to the target language. This is a concept from the source language, and it has been adopted as it is in its pronunciation. Let us also have a look at some very simple everyday sentences which are slightly ambiguous in nature. And one of the major problems for translators is ambiguity existing in the language. It is not a problem for the translators only. Even when we are communicating on day-to-day basis, our problem with ambiguity is there. So let us have a look at the example. He touched his bag, and if you were to ask whose bag, whether he touched his own bag or he touched his, referring to somebody else's bag. He saw a man with spectacles. Who was wearing these spectacles? She was wearing these spectacles, or she saw the person who was wearing these spectacles? Old men and women. So these are instances of ambiguities, and these instances are difficult to process in the source language itself. When they are difficult to understand in the source language, obviously the translators would also face some difficulties in translating them. Let us have a look at a very interesting example from Hindi, which is written in Devanagari here. It says, Ruko mat badho. The second one compared with the first one is Ruko mat badho. Now here the script is same, the text is same, the pause would, or say the intonation pattern would decide whether it is an instruction to move or to wait. Similarly, word plays, riddles, puns, they all also offer big challenges, and they are challenging because there are multiple possibilities, there are multiple interpretations possible in them. Let's also have a look at some other entertainment texts. If you look at them, these are very crafty sentences, which these are creative instances of language use, where you have an expectation when you read the first part, and then there is a kind of a resolution once you complete the entire sentence. If you look at the first sentence, it says, on the other hand, you have different fingers. So now when you read the first part, you expected that there would be something very different from what comes actually in this sentence. So these are instances which also pose challenges in the source as well as target language. So the translator is able to translate them. We notice that most often when such texts appear before a translator, the translator is able to transfer such messages. They are able to translate them. The translator is able to translate them because the translator is performing at all levels of the language. The translator is an expert in languages. The translator is performing some kind of a scientific task, which I explained in the start, that a scientific task is a task which you operate in an organized and systematic fashion. So translator automatically becomes a language scientist when the translator is translating. There is no doubt about the fact that translator is scientific in his or her approach. Let us also have a look at another scholar's work who was more interested in machine translation, and Bonnie J. Dorr, who discusses divergences. And provides us with various types of divergences. We will just have a look at, I mean, the complete discussion would be outside the scope of this talk, but let us have a look at the sentences that are given here as examples. I like sweets, and if this were to be translated in the languages that we know, let us just see. In the language which I know, I would say, "Mujhe mithai pasand hai." Now see the English part, "I like sweets," which is only 3 words, and then I say, "Mujhe mithai pasand hai," which becomes very different from the English pattern. Then he rarely appreciates me, which would be translated as, "वो शायद ही कभी मेरी तारीफ करता है." You see, there is a lot changing. "You like dreaming," तुम्हें सपने देखना पसंद है. Things like that. So you look at the lexical divergence at the end of this slide, where it says, "Where is your red shirt?" And how would you say this? "तुम्हारी लाल वाली शर्ट कहाँ है?" One can say "तुम्हारी लाल शर्ट कहाँ है," but putting "लाल वाली" would be would make it more appropriate. So we notice that the requirement of understanding the language properly is not only in say technical or domain specific translation, or say cultural translation or translation of literary text. It is actually required in our day-to-day translation also. It is required in every instance of translation. What is important for us to understand is, on every occasion the translator is translating, he or she is performing a language task, and not only performing a language task, he or she is performing the language task very scientifically. Let us take some developments into consideration. I would like to thank Professor Ashu Sharma for asking me to add these components towards the end of my discussion. And based on her suggestions, I included these components in the later slides. So let us see some developments which have taken place recently. I have talked about translators' activity being very important. Translators as human beings who are able to perform in 2 languages, and they are people who have stored words from 2 languages, as if there are 2 vocabularies, 2 sets of vocabularies existing there, and the translator is able to access them freely. So is it like the translator's mind has 2 storage points which the translator can access freely? And the recent developments in translation studies are pointing to examining such factors from psycholinguistic point of views. They're also trying to know what happens in the translator's mind. They're trying to know how a translator is able to store such informations which are not just lexical in nature, which are not just at the level of words and meanings, which are beyond that. So how is a translator able to perform between 2 cultures? So these are some very important points which are like important for us to know and develop, or say adjust our attitude towards translation and translators. And in this context, the work of United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, is very important for us to know. UNESCO declared 30 September as International Translation Day. And why should it make us happy? It should it is just a day, but the point here is, if you get an opportunity, please have a look at the declaration. The UNESCO declaration of 24 May 2017 states that translation can contribute to world peace. Translation can ensure harmony and develop understanding between nations. And then we would realize that we, being a very diverse country, in particular, say India, or for that matter, more than 60% of the world population is bilingual. That entails the point that all of us actually are bilinguals, and all of us are representing more than one culture at least. So when such a thing is there, we all are inherently normative by translators. So translation is not something which is unique to us. It is something that is coming to us by birth. I am using the word translation also to include interpretation into it. So what I am saying is, all of us are inherently translators and interpreters. All of us are performing the task of translators and interpreters right from our childhood. So UNESCO's second contribution is also very important. That is, it maintains a kind of a website which you can access. The title of this slide, look at the title of this slide, which says Index Translationum. You just have to reach to UNESCO's Index Translationum, which is a very informative website, and it informs you about the languages, the translation scenario, and with that the authors, countries, languages, bibliographies, and translations, how various countries are performing, all those things. And NTM also has done a similar attempt. If you are able to log into, if you are able to browse NTM's website, you may notice that it's one such website which is available in 23 languages, 22 languages of the 8th schedule plus English. And it's also a website which has the scope for maintaining various databases, like database of translators. But what UNESCO's database provides us is as following. According to this database, I have taken this information from UNESCO's website. It says like Rabindranath Tagore is the most translated author in India, which I mean, who ranks higher than Vivekananda or Shakespeare or Aurobindo or Kalidasa. And then India's position among top 50 translating countries is 35, and Germany leads the table. Then Sanskrit and Hindi are ranked 30 and 45 respectively. So these are some very important points in the Indian context. English and Sanskrit are the two major source languages from which translation is happening. But into Sanskrit, the translation into Sanskrit is happening at a very low quantity. Then again, I would like to thank Professor Ashu for this point to be added here. This was, I mean, what avenues and what job opportunities are available for translators and language experts. We always would love to call translators language consultants and language experts or language scientists to provide services. So what avenues are available for translators? My view is that wherever language is operating, the role of translators automatically is becoming important. So you have more canonized areas like commissioned and freelance translations and commissioned and freelance translators, where the agencies are supporting. There is support coming from other side, as well as private industries expanding their business and then requiring advertisements in the language of the prospective buyers and consumers. So advertising in industries are industries in which translators are finding a lot of opportunities. Hospitality industry is offering similar opportunities. Tourism sector, nothing to discuss about that, because it is offering opportunities not only to translators but also to interpreters, and interpreters have done very well. I have listed just a few. Sports is another area where translators and interpreters are likely to be absorbed at a very huge scale. Then we look at localization. Localization refers to making a particular website or application, mobile application or a software available in a regional language or in a language of a particular area. Now, any website or any web app, any mobile application that is developing and intends to reach out globally would require services of translators. So translators have a very hidden, huge treasure here, and the possibility of engagement of translators in localization industry or say domestication activities is very, very high here. Then language pedagogy is also an area where translators can have a big role to play. Translators can become language tutors and tourist guides. Then we come to one more area which is slightly more dedicated, slightly more technical, is called conference interpretation and legal interpretation. Instances of conference interpretation are increasing day by day, and these are instances of language enabling and strengthening, providing services to languages which are not in the mainstream, And occasionally, you might have noticed that at the global platforms, when a discussion happens and the representatives are from different languages, there would be interpreters who would be instantly informing them about informing them about the proceedings, and then decisions are taken, understandings are developed. So they are very important at that level. Then we look at the activities in a more focused manner, and then we look at what is going on in India. And here I would like to, sorry, am I audible? Shall I proceed?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible. Please.
Yes, so we should be interested in looking at the government initiatives and recent developments, in particular in India. And I'm very happy to inform you that Government of India has also identified translation as a very important activity, and it has given translation and interpretation both very high prominence in the newly recently announced new education policy. Let me tell you something which has been in operation before this policy was announced. National Translation Mission is something with which I am closely associated, and the activities of National Translation Mission basically is to create a kind of a translation industry in this country. Now, translation in its various guises is happening in this country for a long time. Say dubbing, subtitling, conversion of various TV programs and movies. All those things are happening for a long time in this country, but they are not organized, and there is no track of how the information is flowing, how the business is flowing, how various stakeholders can benefit from an organized platform. So, NTM came into the scenario in 2008 with the objective of making translation and in an industry in this country, and at the same time making higher education available in regional languages. So what is NTM started doing was to translate books of higher education in all languages of the 8th schedule of the Constitution. So all 22 languages became important simultaneously. This was aimed at strengthening the languages also, and at the same time, those people who are more comfortable reading in their own languages would be benefited a lot. So the translation of higher education books that are in NTM, it's called knowledge texts. These are those books which are taught in universities and colleges. So they became they started the mission started translating them, and then there emerged requirements of various other kinds, like who are our translators, how are they qualified, who certifies them, who will vet the target text, and is there a database. So with all that requirements emerging, NTM conducted a kind of a survey and then built a kind of a database where there is information about the translators, information about publishers, information about universities and languages. All that is available in different databases. And then there emerged another requirement called training of manpower, giving skills to translators. And the mission organizes all kinds of short and long trainings where uninterested persons from language, literature, or whatsoever background can come and participate and benefit from the trainers of the mission. I also would like to mention the activities of another institution called Sahitya Academy, which also encourages translation at various levels. National Book Trust also is an agency where translators can find some opportunities. Then comes the Commission for Scientific and Technical Terminologies, which is located in Delhi, an agency of Ministry of Human Resource Development, which also works on development of terminologies, which works on coining of terms. If we look at various domains, say physics, chemistry, economics, there is a constant requirement of finding words which would be suitable to the English equivalents, or say there would be constant requirements of development of such terms in in various Indian languages. So CSTT has been coining terms and standardizing the terminologies. And in a similar attempt, NTM also has recently published translation equivalents in Indian languages, and these are lexical resources. These are resources similar to dictionaries and glossaries, which are specialized in nature. So these are resources which would benefit, say, a domain called physics or political science or psychology. And a translator who is well versed, who is confident in two languages, would actually require just an equivalent. So a person who is translating, say, online, would just require to check a particular word, to just search a particular word in the dictionary, and take the equivalent and proceed with the translation activity. So these are some tools which would be very helpful. Then we look at slightly different activity which is happening, and which requires our attention at a great level. See, I mean, India is a very diverse country with a lot of languages. It's a very diverse country, linguistically very diverse country, culturally very diverse country, with hundreds and thousands of languages. But at the same time, India is also a country which has a huge number of endangered languages. So on the one hand, we are happy about the linguistic heritage that we have, and at the same time, we are worried that we may, if we do not take appropriate action, we may lose a lot of languages which are endangered at the moment, which are spoken by less number of speakers, which are losing speakers day by day. So what is important for us to understand is, in these languages, the activity to check the endangerment process and the activity to revitalize these languages are focusing on documentation and description. My suggestion to such activities and practitioners of such domains is that translation should naturally be part of such activities. Translation can play an important role in achieving their goals and in safeguarding the linguistic diversity and harmony of the country. How is it possible? This is possible because these communities where the endangerment is happening are also, to a great extent, multilingual or bilingual, and these are communities where translations can happen. The communities can be encouraged to translate from and to their language, and that would help in safeguarding those languages. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Okay. So UNESCO's declaration of 30 September as International Translation Day is an important development, and we should cherish that. And
Sir, you're not audible. Kindly unmute your device. Your voice is not audible.
Mohit says I'm audible.
You are audible, sir. You are audible.
So we should cherish that development, and we should also look towards strengthening the translation activities. The recent mention of translation and interpretation, very prominent mention of translation and interpretation.
We've lost the audio.
Mohit, can you hear me? Am I audible?
You are audible, sir. Please continue. You are audible.
All right, I go ahead. I'm approaching the end of the presentation. So a new institute is likely to be established by the Ministry of Human Resource Development. It will be called Indian Institute of Translation and Interpretation. And if that institute comes, probably translators and interpreters would find a lot of job opportunities, and also academic courses which would actually help them develop their own skills in translation and interpretation, become actual professionals. So translators would get recognition in their profession. And before I conclude, let me come back to the activities of National Translation Mission. National Translation Mission aims at beginning something called certification program, where, say, a translator who is skilled can obtain a certificate of a qualified translator. So in that way, it would be working similar to the certificate or license that a medical practitioner or, say, a legal practitioner has. Then I also encourage, maybe I assume that there are some participants, or there would be some viewers of this lecture who would be interested in taking up translation as a career, or taking up translation in as an activity for earning. And in that case, the activity of translations happening in the National Translation Mission are important for them. The translation activities that are happening in NTM, or say Sahitya Academy or NBT or CSTT, are all activities where there is some revenue, there is some profit. So the translators perform the task and they are paid for their services on different rates. I would be interested in discussing about the rates that the National Translation Mission provides. Suppose one of the participants, or say one of the viewers of this lecture, becomes interested in translating a book of national identified by National Translation Mission. The National Translation Mission pays to that translator an amount of, say, 1 rupee per word. So if the word, if the total number of words in that book is 1 lakh, the translator is likely to get 1 lakh rupees. So that way, the translator, without even going to the office, without even attending to a particular business from, say, 9 to 5, would be able to continue the activities he or she is doing and still carry on a good work and make a livelihood with that. So there are several other opportunities which the mission is offering, and I would be interested to discuss them in details in say, if somebody writes to the mission, and in, say, our future meetings. I think I have reached the time, and I should give a pause to allow some questions also. Thank you for patience. Thank you for listening. Mohit, you can take over now. Rashu, you can take over now.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for elucidating the basic contrast between linguists and translators, transliteration and transcription, translation and interpretation. Also, you have thrown significant light on the issues of translating lexical items, lexical patterns, cultural ambiguities involved, and nuances of translating parody and humor, owing to regionalization of the humorous content. So there was a comment in the comment section in the message box, in the comment box of YouTube channel, which I would like to quote. So your lecture covered from local to global. So that was the potential of your lecture, sir. But there was a question as well, which I would like you to address. What rules should be used while translating humor?
Thank you for the question. I repeat the question before attempting an answer to it. What rules should be adopted while translating humor, right? Rashu, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, exactly. That's it.
All right, all right. See, humor is a phenomena where there are multiple scripts. What I mean by multiple scripts is multiple possibilities, multiple interpretations. So the rule is to identify the 2 possible interpretations or 3 possible interpretations. A humorous instance is always open for interpretation. So the rule is to identify the possible 1, 2, 3, whatever interpretations that are possible, and then see whether in the target language also there is a possibility of multiple interpretations. Otherwise, it would be difficult. There are different types of humor. Some of them which are say social and culturally rooted, or say some of them which are not based on, say, puns or tongue twisters, or say based on the specific distinct aspects of that of the concerned target source language, would be easy to translate.
Thank you so much, sir, for providing this explanation. And thank you once again for acknowledging my minute inputs and doing the needful at your end within a very short span. Thanks. Thanks a lot for this informative session.
Thank you.
Now, furthering the proceedings, may I please request Mr. Sanjeev Rana, Deputy Secretary, Higher Education Department, J&K, to propose a formal welcome address for the valedictory session. Over to Mr. Sanjeev Rana.
Good afternoon to everybody. It's again my privilege and pleasure to address my welcome address to the valedictory function of this event. I hope all of you have enjoyed the 5 days this workshop on translation. First and foremost, I would welcome Shri Talat Parvez Rohila ji, who is the Commission Secretary Higher Education, whose continuous inspiration has been a source of guidance for us and is the main force behind our endeavor for such type of events. I heartily welcome our esteemed director colleges whose advice regarding such events is the source of inspiration for us. I welcome Dr. Tariq ji from Translation Mission of India, without whose support and guidance, I don't think this such a type of event would ever have happened. I heartily welcome Dr. Vandana Sharma from Central University of Jammu. She has been educating us right from the beginning to the end regarding the scope and the dimensions of translations. I also request her for a special talk on value of language translation in J&K. Finally, I welcome all the participants for today's function and thank all of you for gracing us with your benign presence. Thank you all. Thank you, Mohit. Thank you, Rashid, and all our coordination team for organizing such type of event.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for motivating us and enabling the conduct of such kind of workshops possible. Thank you. Now, keeping the time crunch in mind, I would like to share an abridged report of this 1 week international workshop, which is otherwise available in full-fledged version on our YouTube channel titled Program HED. So to begin with the report reading, I would begin with day 1. Day 1 commenced with a formal inaugural session that began with the welcome address by Mr. Sanjeev Rana, Deputy Secretary, Higher Education Department. The ceremony was presided over by Janab Talat Parvez Rohila, Commissioner Secretary, HED, who spoke at length on the practice of translation while delivering his presidential address. Dr. Yasin Ahmed Shah, Director Colleges J&K, delivered the inaugural address, and Dr. Vandana Sharma, Head Department of English, Central University, delivered the keynote address. The first technical session for the day, titled Translation Studies, Its Nature and Scope, was conducted by Professor Panchanan Mohanty, Head Department of English, GLA University, during which he emphasized upon the concept of translation in various cultures and epochs. Day 2, on account of being a Sunday, witnessed only one technical session by Professor Aijaz Mohammad Sheikh, Department of Linguistics, University of Kashmir. He deliberated at length on linguistic theories of translation with a very simplistic approach towards the topic. Day 3 was a heavy but still active day as it brought 3 young professors in front of the participants. The first session, titled Contemporary Translation Scene in India, Some Notes on Translation Practice, was delivered by Dr. Umesh Kumar, Faculty Department of English, PHU. In his lecture, he projected the translation practices of Indian translators as seen through the prism of Western hegemony. The second session was conducted by Ms. Tanvi Negi, Department of Chinese Studies, Doon University. She talked at length at the linguistic and cultural challenges of translating Chinese while providing a panoramic view of the translation practice in China, right from the history of origin of translation in China. The third session was delivered by Mr. Ravi Kumar, Department of Japanese Studies, Doon University. He provided a detailed account of nuances of translating from Japanese to Hindi and vice versa. Though the complete delivery of the session was hampered due to some technical issue at his end, yet he adequately conveyed the crux of his delivery that day. Now, the day 4 saw 2 technical sessions. The first technical session for day 4 was done by Professor Rajesh Sharma, Chairman, Department of English, Punjabi University, Patiala. In a very precise manner, he discussed translating poetry with the help of practical example, which in turn was highly applauded by the participants for providing the required fundamental inputs to the translators. Towards the fag end of the day, Professor Ashfaq Ahmad from Department of Arabic, Banaras Hindu University discussed the problems and prospects of Arabic English translation and provided his inputs on many key issues related to the grammatical and syntactical discord while attempting to translate between these 2 languages. On the final day, which is day 5, Dr. Tariq Khan laid considerable light on the various avenues available to the translators. Now, may I please request Dr. Vandana Sharma, Head, Department of English, Central University, Jammu, to please proceed with her special talk. Over to you, Dr. Vandana Sharma. Welcome, ma'am.
Hello. Hello, good
Hello.
afternoon. Good
Hello.
afternoon.
Very good
Rashi ma'am.
Very good afternoon and welcome. Hearty welcome to you, ma'am. Once again, we're delighted to see you.
Thank you so much. Rather, I had been with you since 4 o'clock. So
yeah, I can see that.
Just give
Please
me a couple
proceed
of
with
minutes.
your special talk titled Milieu of Translation in J&K. I welcome you to take over, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a privilege to be speaking on the concluding day of this e-workshop on language translation skills. I had the opportunity to set the tone for this workshop, and I compliment the organizers, particularly National Translation Mission, Department of Higher Education, Jammu and Kashmir, Dr. Ashu Sharma, who has been, I must say, working persistently to engage the participants in a meaningful way, and her entire team. As I gathered that the illustrious speakers in this e-workshop dwelt at length over various theoretical underpinnings and the translation vis-a-vis cultural challenges in translating Chinese, Japanese, Arabic. And it was really interesting to listen to Dr. Tariq Khan, who was looking at the significance of translation vis-a-vis the National Education Policy 2020 and the opportunities which are there for the scholars, for the translators, the job opportunities at the same time. So I thought that it would be unpardonable if we do not deliberate over the translation of Bhasha literature. And I'm sure that during this entire workshop, there must have been ample discussions and deliberations over the translation of regional literatures. I hope the learned participants remember that in the keynote, I touched upon major issues in translation studies with an overview of translation theory and practice in the Indian context, vis-a-vis the role of translator in the 21st century. But due to paucity of time, I could not deal with the correlation between translation studies and comparative literature. And what is the scenario of translating the regional text with special focus on Dogri text. Therefore, in this talk, I will look at translation of Bhasha literature to comparative literature and nation building. And as a practicing translator, rather, I will say just a drop in the ocean, not much to contribute, but with 2 texts which I have translated, I will give a few illustrations from my own translations. At the outset, let us understand the key term Bhasha in order to place the subject in its proper context. The concept of translation, we know, has underwent a sea change in the post-modern, post-colonial era, particularly in 1980s, thanks to the proliferation of translation theories. And G.N. Devi's term Bhasha literature needs an explication before I say that how translation of it led to the study of comparative literature and ultimately to nation building. As you know, the translation as an activity was traditionally considered to be inferior. That is because original writing was considered to be the superior. It was never studied as a discipline until the 1960s. Edward Gensler underlines 5 different approaches to translation beginning with 60s, which were American Translation Workshop, Science of Translation, Early Translation Studies, Polysystem Theory, and Translation Studies and Deconstruction. So we understand that till 1963, there was no translation center. There was no association of literary translation. And in 1970s, Ivan Zohar and Tel Aviv offered a new perspective with their policy system, which challenged the superiority of the original and translation. Apart from this, we understand, I touched upon this even in my keynote also, that how the feminist scholars like Laurie Chamberlain, they drew attention to the sexualization of terminology. By 1980s, translation studies had acquired a new dimension and was no longer viewed as a process of change into another language or a transference of meaning from SL to TL, retaining the sense of SL, but a regulated transformation, to use Derrida's term. So to quote Gensler, translation is seen as an empowering act, a nourishing act, an act of affirmative play that is very close to Benjamin Derrida position, which sees translation as a life force that ensures a literary text survival. Having discussed the development of translation studies as a discipline, let us understand the term Bhasha in Indian context. We know that it refers to modern Indian languages other than English, for example, Dogri, Kashmiri, Odia, Punjabi, Bengali, Hindi. These are bhashas, and the literature written in the languages, in these languages, is known as bhasha literature. So the translation of one bhasha into another bhasha literature provides an opportunity to make a comparative study between them. And in a multi-language country like India, this is inevitable. Comparative literature is a stage of reading made possible and easier by the availability of translation. Rennie Wallach and Austin Warren, they have made the term comparative literature in they have used the term comparative literature in 3 senses. First, the study of oral literature, especially folktale themes and their migration of how and when they entered higher artistic literature. Second, comparative literature as the study of relationships between 2 or more literatures. And third, conception of comparative literature identifies it with the study of literature in its totality with the world literature or the universal literature. So the study of comparative literature in India can be facilitated on the lines suggested by Wellach and Warren Austin through translation. It is interesting to note that, I hope I'm audible. Hello?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible, of course.
Okay, because it was flashed on my screen that host has asked you to start your video. So I thought perhaps I was just speaking and I could not make my point.
You're very much there, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So the study of comparative literature in India can be facilitated on the lines suggested by Wellach and Warren Austin through translation. And in India, we have a unique situation, that is, if bhasha literatures are translated into English, a comparative study of such literatures will be easier and fruitful instead of translating a bhasha literature into another, say, Dogri or Bengali. We can translate it into English and make a profitable study of it. So if a translation is literature 3, we can have Indian comparative literature in English. That is great contribution to translation to literature. So in this way, translation helps in the process of nation building in our country, not only in India, but in other parts of the world where multilingualism is a reality, like France, Canada, Switzerland. Translation plays a pivotal role in nation building, and movements in literature, art, and trends in political opinion sail from country to country through translation. Now, the point to be noted is that in post-colonial societies, translation assesses the dynamics of power that exist between languages. Critics have also pointed out commonalities between translation and post-colonial literatures. Maria Timogso states that translation can be perceived as a metaphor for post-colonial, since both the post-colonial writer and the translator address an intercultural audience. They try to navigate this complex terrain. They try to navigate this complex terrain through appropriation, through innovation, and subversion. Another post-colonial translation critic, Tejaswini Niranjana, conceptualizes translation as a site where the conflict of cultures and languages is most clearly manifested. Extending this argument, let us remember that many post-colonial English translations like Gurdial Singh's Madida Diva, which was translated into English as The Last Flicker, published by Sahitya Akademi, or Meel Pathar, which was English translation of Dogri short stories. So these texts, they address the vexing issue of intercultural transfer, thereby problematizing power equation and hegemony as it operates in languages. Let us remember that Chinua Achebe's writings, the great African iconic writer, and the use of English, where he emphasizes the complexities and the depth of Igbo culture. So he italicized the terms. All of us have read a very popular work, the magnum opus, Things Fall Apart. So he italicized the names like Ogin, Chi, Uli, etc., and which exude from the page rather than subsume, inscribe their difference and mark them untranslatable. Likewise, when we talk of untranslatability and subversion, the name of Gugiwa Thiago comes to our mind, who shifted from English to Gikuyu. By the time he came to write his last English novel, Gugi had completely abandoned English translations of Gikuyu, words or phrases that he used. After all, if you could have French and German phrases in English text, why not Gikuyu, he said. And the critic Timokso, she observes that the more confident a writer becomes, the less obliged he or she feels to give these glosses. Now, let me give you a brief overview of my own attempts in translation. My maiden attempt in translation was Bhava Jitto, which was published in 2011. It was the English translation of Padma Shri Professor Ramnath Shastri's magnum opus, a very powerful play, Bhava Jitto, a powerful text which is based on Jitto legend, which celebrates affinity that exists between Jitto and average Dogra man or woman. So this translation in 2011, which I attempted, it was my humble attempt to elevate Bhava Jitto from a Dogra peasant hero to Indian peasant hero. And of course, the biggest challenge was the fact that this text is embedded in Dogra culture. We have various karaks, we have various kinds of expressions, the karaks, the ballads as we call them, right? So these karaks, one such karak, I just give you one example wherein it's mentioned, Onidai lekh likhyo, kusena padya jai, ik chare cha iranj ge nasse, ik jare cha iranj nasse, duwe jaregi aaye. So, such kind of, as it is said that the inherent fallacy of translating poetry. So translating poetry, how difficult it is to imbibe the essence. So, I just try to navigate and address such kind of karaks by translating. So how I translated it was, there could be another way also, but I just try to translate it as that fate has its own machinations no one can read. Deer run away from a forest, the other one they reach. So, reach and read. This is how I just try to bring some rhyme at the same time. And then there were numerous culture specific words, whether it was the word like bhava, whether it was the word like karak, whether it was the word like data, thakur, bua. So which I annotated because it was not possible to find an equivalence. Then fortunately, I was assigned a Sahitya Akademi project, and my second translation was the English translation of Sahitya Akademi awarded Dogri short stories of Professor Madan Mohan Sharma, Dudh Lau Jair, which he had published in 1971, and I had the opportunity to translate it in 2017. And I translated it as Waiting for Neelkant and Other Stories. Now, in this literary translation, one of the biggest challenge in any kind of literary translation, one of the biggest challenges is to carry an idea intact in all its shades and layers of meaning from one language to another. So when we just take the title of this book, Dudh Lau Jair, it's the story of a milkmaid, Nanki. This particular story I'm talking, who refuses to sell milk after realizing the fact that milk sold by her forms blood in human beings, which in turn converts to poison. So the backdrop of this powerful story, very poignant story, is the partition and the bloodshed and the cataclysm during partition, and the hatred between two communities. So now the literal translation, had I taken it milk, blood, poison, because the title of the book is Dudh Lau Jair, so it would have sounded comically literal and bland. So when I focused on the overtones, I focused on the undertones of the most powerful story of the collection, which conveys how poison in various form exists both within and outside humankind. And Lord Shiva as Neelkant, because the writer there says that there is so much of poison in this world, and who will come and gulp this poison, right? So it is ultimately Lord Shiva who will come and save the mankind. He will emerge as the savior, right? So I just looked at this particular message of the writer of Professor Madan Mohan, and where he says that Neelkant is the only savior. So waiting for Neelkant, in my opinion, captures the ardent need for the milk of humanity, allegorized as waiting of the character for Nanki. And at the same time, I also looked at that how in all the short stories which are there in this Waiting for Neelkant, Dudh Lau Jair, there is a waiting in one form or the other, whether it is a waiting of a mother, whether it is a waiting of a wife for good times, whether it is a waiting for gender equality in one ways or the other, whether it is waiting to come out of the rut of human life or the break the monotony. So keeping all these factors in mind, I thought that yes, let me translate it. Let me translate the title. The title should be Waiting for Neelkant and Other Stories. So here, as a translator, I have taken into consideration major thematic strand of all stories, which is waiting in one form or the other. Let me read one excerpt from my translation, which will give you some idea. I would like to show you the second translation of mine, which is Waiting for Neelkant and Other Stories, which was published by Sahitya Akademi in 2017. Now, in this particular book, very powerful stories, very poignant stories at the same time. And let me read one excerpt where it is said, which conveys the message at the same time. So here is written, I translated it like this. I'm not reading the Dogri version. And he says, now I ruminate. Was there only one pot of poison that Lord Shiva drank on that day? Was this poison controlled forever with Lord Shiva's cunt turning blue? If this is true, then why does milk have poison? Why is it that the blood running in our body has poison? Why does a need arise to appeal to Lord Shiva, to visit again and swallow the poison and become Nilkant once again? So, in nutshell, I must admit that as a translator, my strategy has been to maintain an equipoise vis-a-vis translation policy and the way literary translators function. So I conclude with this hope that with the culmination of this workshop, the participants will take up either a literary or a non-literary translation. Dr. Tariq has, aptly given a very lucrative offer that how NTM, pays quite lucratively to the people who are interested in making such kind of translation. So we must realize the fact that no writer or person has been able to say what he or she wanted to say, because language is elusive. So we cannot deny the fact, the elusive nature of language. So this means that something is always missed even in creative writing. Hence, let us all come out of this fear that something is lost in translation. Let us all combine ourselves. Let us all combine in ourselves the skills of a polyglot and a linguist and continue translating. So with this, I once again congratulate and compliment the organizers of this wonderful workshop. And I hope that this workshop will yield fruitful results and we will have more translators emerging. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an optimistic outlook. We really hope to come up to your words. Thank you.
I must congratulate the organizers of this translation workshop for holding a comprehensive type of interaction with the members. And on the beginning session, we had some discussion how the translation was started in the ancient times, also how the cross learning of various cultures and civilizations have helped growth intellectual activity in the colleges, in the civilizations, and how our higher education will be benefiting of the translation activity. So we can see translation is now becoming a very integral part of today's learning. And we understand that translation has now become the cardinal principle in the new education policy as well. And we have a provision to set up the Indian Translation Institute within the national education policy, because now we understand that the instructions of learning need to be given in the mother tongue. That means there is more scope for translators to play a part in translating the knowledge, whether academic knowledge or research knowledge or any other skill knowledge, to the people who are actually enrolled for colleges for employability enhancement or doing the research work or doing other academic pursuits. So we find a very critical role of translators in the higher education domain. And this today's workshop, I am very sure, must have given us an insight where to start, how to start, and what are the parameters and what are the contours which we need to pursue for this translation activity to grow in the colleges. It's a very new and not very focused area of activity in colleges, but by enacting the policy on new education policy in 2020, which has to be now implemented in the next 15 years, and by 2035, we understand that 3 language formula, which has been now enunciated by the education planners in the new education policy, would be the silver lining in addressing our today's workshop. And this workshop is actually a beginning of a new era when we'll be seeing many of the colleges having the Department of Translation and also having the institutions at the national and the state level and UT levels getting established, and many of the materials, many of the softwares getting developed to translate the knowledge, what is actually written in the textbooks or what is actually in the research papers or what is known as a local skill with the people whom we take as master craftsmen, and we want to integrate all the vocational, professional, and also the academic pursuits in the learning process. I understand this aspect, all the 360 dimensions of translation would have been discussed in these 3 days workshop, and organizer must have taken all the interest. I was having opportunity to listen to some of the experts on the subject. I was having that Mr. Mohanty, P. Mohanty was with us, Madam Sharma was with us. Everybody were giving their insights, and we could learn and become more wiser. I could not find more time to come in between, but today happens to be a validatory session, and I'm lucky to showcase I have 5-6 principals with me who actually are listening to this, including today's function, and this gives opportunity for all of us to contribute. I would like to have a brief of what has happened on 3 days, so that we can just I can just take some more additional knowledge before I sign off for other assignment of the today's day. Thank you very much. I would like to listen from the organizers or one other person who would actually brief me what were the outcomes, what were the new dimensions identified, so that I can pursue them as a policy matter as a Commissioner Secretary of Higher Education. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your positive feedback and promising words. We'll surely get back to you with the objectives, what we've attained during the workshop, all in the black and white form. And the objectives were already submitted with the proposal. And we've surely, in a way, been able to attain most of them. And the further discussions can be carried on afterwards. And due to certain communication issue, we missed Dr. Yasin Ahmed's valedictory address, and we directly came to your presidential address. Thank you so much, sir, for being so upright and so forthcoming with your decision making and with your commitments. Thank you. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you, Rusha. I would like to have an action plan on whatever was discussed in 3 days. What points need to be followed up, so that we actually institutionalize the initiative. It should not be limited to now this debate and seminar only. We
Absolutely.
need to put things on perspective and also in action. So I believe in action plan rather than only giving a sermon or a valedictory or welcoming on the seminar day. But I wish that whatever has transited in the 3 days should be brought in actionable point. What should be done in the first go, and then subsequent 3 years plan or 5 years plan. And while the NEP establishes the Indian Translation Institute at the national level, we should be ready with the state unit. We should be also ready with the district units, and we should be ready with the people who actually will be writing our curriculums, writing our textbooks. Even MOOCs recording needs to be done now in the local language or translated language. So we, as I was saying, we have to identify the English as a highway, and all highways should lead to the contributory and tributary roads, where we will be having different knowledge centers, and those knowledge centers will be pulled up to us understanding and giving all the children and enroll with us, and even the faculty has to play the part. We need to identify what steps need to be now taken.
Absolutely, absolutely got your point, sir. We shall be formulating an action plan soon and getting back to you with that. So now I would like to proceed with the formal vote of thanks formality, which I should pursue. It's not formality, it's indeed a heartfelt gratitude, which I need to mention. And Thanksgiving is one of the most significant and desirable act which substantially manifests your regards and sincere feelings. To begin with the pleasant exercise, let me place on record dynamic and futuristic vision of Mr. Talat Parvez Rohela, chief patron of the workshop, as it's only because of his vision Higher Education Department can host this workshop and many more like this. Next, my sincere gratitude is rendered towards Dr. Yasin Ahmed Shah, Director Colleges, JNK, who is a towering yet really inspirational senior of the department. Sir, let me acknowledge that without your timely intervention and sincere efforts, this workshop wouldn't have been possible. Highly indebted to you indeed, sir. Further, Dr. Vandana Sharma, Head Department of English, Central University, Jammu, is duly thanked for adding immensely to the intellectual by her intellectual inputs to the program, and even more so for her affable demeanor. It is worthwhile to mention that she is extremely grounded and friendly to accommodate with our work-related vagaries and confusions. High regards to you, ma'am. Next, Mr. Sanjeev Rana, Deputy Secretary, Higher Education Department, is thanked for ensuring maximum support at his end and leading from the forefront like a true leader. Dr. Tariq Khan, Officer in Charge, NTM, is highly thanked for materializing this collaboration in its best possible manner and providing much needed material and human support. Of course, all the learned and veteran speakers of the workshop deserve thanks in abundance for enriching the potential and knowledge matrix of the workshop by many folds. Further, the workshop worthy participants are thanked for their valuable participation to the workshop. Last but not the least, all the members coordination cell, including Dr. Zubair, Dr. Ashfaq, Dr. Richa, and Dr. Mohit, but are highly thanked for their incessant support and agile action at their ends to ensure the success of the workshop. Dr. Mohit Bhatt is especially thanked for providing relentless technical support, irrespective and inconsiderate of working hours. It can be termed as a 24/7 support at your end, sir. Extremely grateful to you for that. Dr. Richa Gupta is also thanked for enabling timely mails to the participants and feedback forms, etc. Dr. Zubair and Dr. Ishfaq are highly thanked for enabling press coverage and other technical issues in a very versatile manner. Thanks to everyone. And it would be unjust to not to mention and thank my daughter, who has truly been my unsung warrior in my technical battles. She's rather risen to be my selfless personal assistant. Definitely without her help, I wouldn't have been able to perform this task. And there's an important announcement, dear participants. Hope all of you have submitted the Google form of the assessment and the feedback form. Now, all the technical sessions of the workshop are available on our YouTube channel, Program at HED, in edited form. So it gives us immense pleasure to share that most of our videos have got more than 4,000 views, the maximum of which being 7,432. Thanks for providing such a massive response. Thank you very much. Thanks to one and all. Thank you.